First session is Prof. Norfilza Mokhtar, who is currently the chairman of the Health and Advanced Medicine clusters. And also, she is the professor of genome medicine at the Department of Physiology. I'm not going to go through all the details, as you, I'm sure everyone would know Prof. Norfilza very well already. So next, I'm delighted to introduce to you the speaker for the first session is Professor Emad El-Omar. Okay, Professor Emad have been awarded the he is a gastroenterologist who have been awarded the UK Certificate of Completion of Specialist Training in both gastroenterology and general internal medicine in 1997. He has served as chair of the gastroduodenal sections of the British Society of Gastroenterology from 2007 to 2013. That is for 2 terms. The Scottish National Panel of Specialists for Oncology for 4 years. He is a member of the Council of the British Society of Gastroenterology and the Scottish Society of Gastroenterology. He involved in a number of national initiatives that oversees research and service provision, matter related to upper gastrointestinal disease. He is also the current editor-in-chief of the journal Gut, with an impressive impact factors of 17.9. And he currently serves on a number of international editorial boards as well, like Gastroenterology, British Medical Journal, Helicobacter, and a long list of their journals. I'm not going to spend all the time just to introduce Prof. Emad. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Prof. Emad to deliver his talk on research and high-performing culture of top universities. Prof. Emad.
Thank you very much, Professor Khan, for this very kind introduction, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. I greet you here from Sydney. I am sorry we can't be with you in person. Unfortunately, we live in very difficult times, and we just have to survive this period and use technology, which I hope will work this morning, to try and share. So let's have a look here, see if we can share. Okay, so can you see this, Professor Tan?
Yes, Prof. Emad.
So thank you for the kind introduction. I am Professor of Medicine here at the St. George and Sutherland Clinical School at the University of New South Wales. I'm very honored to have been chosen as a distinguished professor with UKM, and I hope that this very exciting session this morning with Professor Grover as well will be of use to you, the audience, in this wonderful university. So this is my home. This is the iconic Sydney Opera House. It's a beautiful place to visit. So once we have all of this COVID-19 crisis, I hope many of you will come and visit us, and we would be delighted to host you here in the city and also the university. So I was given a very ambitious kind of challenge to cover 3 very important areas when it comes to research. One is how to deliver a research culture with global impact. Second is how to maximize the quality and impact of research publications. And I hope my experience as an editor of a journal would be quite useful here. And finally, how to maximize success in obtaining research funding. Now, all of these 3 themes are actually very much interlinked, and one leads to the other, and they're absolutely essential to get right if you're going to be climbing up the ladder of the top universities globally. Now, the first challenge is how to build and deliver a research culture with global impact. And in fact, if you look at the kind of university ranking systems that are available at the moment, the 3 best known ones are the Times Higher Education World University Rankings. You're familiar perhaps with the QS World University Rankings. I didn't actually know what the QS stood for until I started working, on this presentation. And it's just the name Italian gentleman who actually formed that company that allows them to collect all the data that is relevant. And Simmons is the other one. Quacquarelli is the Italian gentleman, and it's actually based in the UK. And finally, there's the one from China, and this is the academic rankings of the world universities. And each one of these has specific criteria that they assess when they rank the universities. And I'll just give you some examples here. For example, if you look at the QS World University Rankings, this is the methodology that they use. And as you can see, 40% weighting goes on academic peer review, and this is assessed based on internal global academic surveys. So quite a lot of these kind of methodologies rely on surveys, either academics, fellow academics, or employers and so forth. And this is how they put things together into this algorithm. So 40% is quite a large proportion based on these surveys for academic peer review. Faculty to student ratio is another thing, that's 20% in this one. Citations per faculty, and that's a kind of measure of research impact. Employer reputation based on the surveys of the graduate employers. International student ratio, kind of lesser kind of contribution, about 5%, and then international to staff ratio. So that basically completes the QS World University Rankings. Now, the one that is perhaps a little bit, QS apparently is the most widely read on a global scale, but the Times Higher Education is particularly popular in countries like the UK and so forth. And this one actually was in partnership with the QS between 2003 and 2009, and then decided to go their own way into about 2010 and partnered with Thomson Reuters to try and have their own method of assessing university rankings. And this is a table of their methodology. And you can see perhaps just at the bottom here, the 32.5% is based on citations and what they call research influence. And this is calculated based on citation impact. And that's quite a tricky thing, because if you're comparing different disciplines, for example, medicine or basic science compared to mathematics, mathematics tends to have very low citations because it doesn't progress as quickly as say, neuroscience, for example. So there is a kind of an algorithm for trying to kind of modulate that citation impact based on the subject, based on the journals that publish in that particular subject, and based on that particular year of publication. So that if you look at publications generally across the globe, they kind of become quite similar and equitable. So this is the universal citation impact measure. But essentially all of these things, there's obviously an element of kind of lack of transparency sometimes. There's an element of some criticism, for example, about ignoring things like the arts and social sciences and so forth, and favoring subjects that are much more readily citable, for example. So nothing is perfect, but unfortunately, these are the tools that we have for assessing university rankings. Now, what are the characteristics that define the high-performing research units? I'd like to point you to this particular agency here, the UK Research and Innovation, and its branch Research England, which has looked at this particular question very thoroughly. And if you want some literature to go and read, this would be an excellent starting point. And essentially, they identify 8 of these characteristics, which I've summarized on the next slide. But just generally speaking, these are the general considerations. First, collaboration and networking. This is incredibly important in research. And most of the high-ranking universities and institutions have that as part of their philosophy. Collaboration strengthens your impact, strengthens your ability to answer questions, enhances the quality of your papers, enhances the chances of getting research funding, and so forth. So this is absolutely essential. Second is a coherent strategy and a diverse funding sources. So you want to maximize the dollars that come into your institution and to your research. Now, this could be what we call category 1, or kind of government funding, but it could also be industry, could be philanthropy. Essentially, you want to have as diverse as possible funding sources. And finally, having supportive institutional and departmental practices that would allow you to have this kind of coherent strategy for enriching your research performance. Now, these are the characteristics, the 8 that I mentioned previously in the previous slide. And essentially, if you look at all of the very highly successful and high-performing research units, they have these characteristics. First, in terms of staff, most of them would have PhDs. There'll be professorial positions and appointments, most with international experience. So people who have gone out of their country into any other country, and it doesn't matter where you go, as the moment you actually leave the country, your share price goes up because you essentially acquire a new experience and expertise. So when you come back to your country or to your department or to your unit, you have something to give back, and that's obviously enriches that environment. They recruit the best, but they also keep them very happy, and they try and retain them by keeping them happy. And to retain them and keep them happy, they offer training, mentorship, continuing professional development, and they give them incentives and rewards. We're not talking here necessarily about financial rewards, but actually satisfaction and inspiration to continue in this very hard and difficult journey of research. And number 4 is a genuine belief in social and ethical values. And I think this is a very important aspect that, you know, we might think is a little bit fluffy, but in fact, most of the top universities have this kind of ethos, which is they're trying to do some good. They have this social and ethical responsibility, and that really defines their strategies as research-intensive institutions. They also have leaders that enjoy accountable autonomy. So if you're a leader of a unit or a research institute or whatever, you must have some kind of autonomy to make the decisions that are based entirely on science and research and achievement, and not be dictated to by politics or by administrators. I think this is very important, but it has to be accountable. Obviously, you know, no one is free to do whatever they wish. The institutional strategy also has to be real and living and owned by everyone. And this is where the participation by everyone in formulating that strategy is very, very important. Now, in terms of their income, the research income tends to be obviously higher compared to the less high achieving departments. And the final one is collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. If there's one word that you will remember from my talk this morning, it's about collaboration. Now, this is another resource here, which is about the research culture. This is a beautiful piece of work by Shift Learning, which was published last year, commissioned by the Wellcome Trust. And what they've looked here is that they've explored the social, economic, cultural, political climate to provide a context for understanding the issues, challenges, practices, and priorities that contribute to the current research culture. So they're trying to understand research culture, and they've come up with some, again, it's a fascinating read, and I would advise you to seek this one out. Now, there are important definitions here if you want to understand this document. One is, what does excellent mean? Now, excellent means internationally competitive. What does impactful mean? It means benefiting humanity. This is the desire to do good. What does impactful also mean? Increasing prosperity, so that whatever research that we're doing has to translate into better economic prosperity for that country. And if these kind of elements are taken care of, you know, the rest becomes much, much easier. Impactful also means driving innovation, and innovation obviously drives excellence, and it drives economic success and prosperity. Impactful means highly cited, and usually word leading means performed by the top researchers, the ones that we've talked about in the previous slide. And it also means conducted to the highest quality, the most ethical, scientifically rigorous approach to doing research. Now, this is another very important document. And again, I advise you to read that one if you're interested in this topic. And this is how to build a research culture. And this was a document produced by the Hanover Research, an agency that specializes in these kinds of very important high impact reports. And what they've done here is they've identified those essential characteristics of institutions with high levels of research productivity, and profiles these institutional plans for developing and maintaining cultures of research. So what do they suggest? Well, they say that a culture of research requires the institutional and unit-based leaders to set clear research goals and communicate them well and effectively to their constituents. If they wish to develop a culture of research, they must allocate significant resources for the faculty and must provide training and support. Now, obviously, some very rich institutions will do better in this than others, But whatever you have, you've got to prioritize that and try and be very strategic with the funds that you have. Now, to develop this kind of a culture of research also requires collaboration, again, collaborative personal relationships amongst the faculty members and outside of that institution. And to implement this cultural change, the administrators in these institutions must be prepared to tailor that resource allocation based on the faculty members' current motivations and abilities. Now, just they remind us that, you know, to actually set a successful culture of research takes many years. And this is something, this is a kind of a, not a quick and dirty exercise. This is something that you're investing in the future. And you've got to be patient, and you've got to be tenacious, and you've got to kind of stand up to all of the challenges that come your way. And once this is up and standing, you've got to have regular maintenance. And as much as possible, get engagement by your stakeholders, and particularly your students. Now, we move kind of now from the that kind of topic about how to establish that research culture to one of the essential constituents of that success, which is how to actually communicate that research output that your excellent strategies have produced. So this is where we come to the kind of the issue of research communications and publications. Now, scientific publishing is a very important topic, and I wish this would actually be taught at university to all schools, not just medical schools or science. It's got to be a basic kind of skill to everybody engage this, because everyone has a duty to publish. One, to yourself, for your career, your self-esteem, your ambition, your legacy, but also to your colleagues, the staff, the students, the collaborators that have put their trust in you. Obviously to your institution that, you know, whose ranking actually depends on your output that is published. Clearly to your funders who've given you money. Quite often it's taxpayers' money, so it's very important to make sure that this is actually well spent. And as a clinician, as somebody who is in medicine, I think to your patients, I think they look up to you, they trust you, they've given you their time and their samples and their very privileged information for you to do some good with that. So I think this is a duty towards them as well. And generally to science and medicine, and to kind of, you know, the general science that affects everyone. Now, there's a saying here that if it was not published, it was not done. And there's this kind of mantra of publish or perish. Now, I don't particularly like that one, because I think what is far more important is not really the quantity of publications, but the quality of it. So, you know, one very high impact publication that actually changes clinical practice is far more important than 10 publications that basically fail to answer that research question. Now, I just show you this because it's a very personal thing for me. This was the very first paper that I published in the kind of prehistoric ages back in 1987. I was still a medical student then. And this was published, lo and behold, in the journal that I was destined to become editor of. This was published back in 1987 in Gut. And I was so proud and so delighted as a medical student to have my name on any publication. From that moment on, I was absolutely hooked and inspired. And this is basically that word inspiration. I think when you have that kind of successful conclusion to all the hard work that goes into designing the work, funding the work, you know, analyzing it and writing it up, and then finally getting it actually published, it's so inspiring and so motivating. So this is the letter that we usually send our successful authors. We thank them for submitting the work to our journal, and we have pleasure, and this is true pleasure, in accepting it for publication, and we basically congratulate them. Now, this is a very happy letter, and you know, hopefully the next few slides will give you some indicators as to how you can achieve that very happy output. So what defines a high impact publication? Well, it's essentially all about the research question. So that research question, first of all, has got to be important. In other words, worthwhile. It's not something that is trivial or something that is essentially, you know, is not going to make a huge impact on clinical practice or scientific advancement or whatever. And it's one that is essentially, then your research is very sound with conclusions which will stand the scrutiny of others working in the field. So in other words, if you've published this work, people will follow. You've set the lead and they will follow it, and they will try to either refute it or confirm it. And this is the type of work that would define a high impact publication. Now, it's got to have some significant advance, which will stimulate further discussion and research, and it's got to be relevant to clinical practice within the foreseeable future. These are the parameters that we use in clinical research or, in a kind of medical scientific research. Now, I am a great fan of the Lancet, which is one of the top journals, and I've learned from one of the senior editors of the Lancet this beautiful analogy of essentially the cornerstone and the keystone. And they and us and all of these high impact journals would love to get those papers that start a new field or start a new concept, that what they call the kind of the cornerstone. But they also like to get the definitive paper that puts it all together. This is the kind of the concept of the keystone. This is a beautiful kind of stone arch here. And that kind of keystone is the crucial last kind of piece of evidence that locks everything into place and allows us to move forward and have a useful kind of outcome. It's a beautiful analogy. Now, what is the strategy for success? Well, it's pretty straightforward. This is very easy. And you might think, what, this is just, every child knows this. Sadly, however, and I receive thousands and thousands of papers. These very, very, simple, essential components are hardly ever kind of adhered to in the majority of publications. First, you've got to do, you've got to learn the fundamentals of good research. You've got to learn the fundamentals of good writing. You have to communicate that good research to the outside world. You've got to have kind of tricks up your sleeve in terms of attracting the attention of editors. Most importantly, you've got to be honest about targeting the right journal so that you're not kind of overstepping your, the quality of the work and where it falls in that kind of hierarchy of journals. You've got to also be tenacious and learn how to handle rejection and your strategy beyond that rejection. You don't just perish. You've got to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and then move on. And also, once you kind of get very close and get these, manuscripts with not a rejection, but a major revise, you've got to have that strategy to be able to overcome that final hurdle. So what defines good research? Well, you've got to choose a good unit with a good mentor. Mentorship, incredibly important. Don't work on your own. You must have a mentor to guide you throughout your career. And this is an important concept that we as leaders and institutions as the ones that host all of these leaders should adopt as a basic philosophy of providing that mentorship and identifying those mentors to those students who are very keen to be mentored. Second is reading the literature and being conversant with what's being done. Don't reinvent the wheel. Find out what everybody else has done so far, then identify the gap and then target that gap. Don't just repeat what everybody else has done. Formulate important research questions. We've already mentioned that. And essentially, it's all about the design. So the design of the study is what either causes it to be very successful or sinks it completely. And to have a very sound design, you have to have a statistician involved at the beginning of that process, not at the end where you bring them in to analyze your data and give you the p-values. They've got to be an integral part of that team. And this is a very important concept. You've got to be able to power your study. Power it for what? To answer the question. It doesn't matter whether it's a positive answer or a negative answer. It's got to be answered definitively, either yes or no. You've got to therefore think about the controls and the reproducibility of your findings. Now, the study design, many papers that are submitted and many projects are wasted opportunities because they've had inappropriate controls. They've not matched the cases and the controls. There was an imbalance, in kind of age and gender and so forth. Purely observational studies, okay, they're useful, but they're not going to be high impact unless it's a very stunning first observation. So that's another, if you want high impact papers, you've got to do work that is beyond observation. It's got to have mechanistic kind of insight into the disease. And of course, as clinicians, again, the optimal design is a double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled parallel group trial design, which is the most robust. Why? Because it provides us with definitive answers as much as we know. Now, this is involving the statistician at the beginning. I just won't labor the point, but essentially, if you're not able to answer the research question because you have a small number of patients, ask a different question or collaborate so that, instead of doing the study from one hospital, do them from 10. Instead of doing it from one country, do them from 3 or 4 countries so that you're your study has far more, impact and higher scientific value. Now, second, other than the actual design of the study, is now that you've done your work and now is the chance to communicate this work, you've got to learn how to communicate your work. And this is where you are actually telling a story. It's just as simple as telling stories, and it must make sense. It must have a beginning, a middle, and a take-home message. And essentially, you just got to tell your story to the audience that is going to hear that story. And we all know that those who tell the stories rule the world. Now, for the junior researchers out there, you don't need to, again, reinvent the wheel. Work a little harder, just do some investigation about how to acquire those skills that allow you to write things and communicate science and publications beautifully. There are there's so many resources available. Scientific writing courses, workshops, online resources, books, articles. Read the papers that are published in the top journals, and you will learn, just see how they structure the work, how they actually express the concepts, how they present the results and tabulate things and so forth. This is actually a great learning experience, and you should be doing this early in your career so that you don't have to suffer, later with rejected papers. This is a book that I used, many years ago. Again, it's a 500 tips for success, but there are also, quite a lot of the big publishers would give you some online resources about how to write to journals, and Elsevier is one of the biggest kind of resources. I have no kind of they're not the publisher for our journal, but I admire the fact that they have these resources and they cover quite a lot of the things that junior researchers might be interested in reading. Now, before you submit, you've only got one chance to make a first good impression, so it's got to be perfect. You can't send something that is less perfect, because it will be essentially a failure of communication. So the abstract is very important, and you've got to have addressed that question of so what, so that when people read the paper, they say, so what, what is going on? So when you're writing your science and communicating your findings, less is more. Less is more. You don't have to be verbose. You just got to be succinct and straight to the point. And I always like to show this example here. This is a one page published April 25th, 1953. The authors are Watson and Crick. This was the molecular structure of nucleic acid. And I love this bit at the, kind of in the penultimate paragraph, when they say it has not escaped our notice that the specific pairing we have postulated immediately suggests a possible copying mechanism for the genetic material. I mean, this is the understatement of the century. Essentially, in that one pager, they're providing the basis of life, which is absolutely amazing. Now, you've got to choose the right journal. You've got to be very realistic, and you've got to really work on your expectations so that to avoid all the kind of the disappointment, you've got to pitch it to the right place. So just in the interest of time, I think I'll move on quickly, but I hope I've given you enough about the publication kind of tricks, and I wish you all success in that kind of field. Now, in the last 2 or 3 minutes, I'd just like to move on to the third and incredibly important aspect of successful research culture, which is funding. Now, funding is very, very difficult, very competitive. Unfortunately, we're not all blessed, and most countries don't have so many resources that they can spend on research. So generally speaking, it's drying up almost everywhere. Writing grants is very time consuming and actually energy sapping. So you've got to be prepared and tough for this. You've got to have the tools and infrastructure for managing those grant submissions. And these, unfortunately, are not always optimal. So you've got to work with that as well. And to be successful at getting grants, you must have track record and grants, which kind of raises that kind of ugly prospect of catch-22 situation. You'd be familiar with that kind of concept. But essentially, it's a game, and you must learn to play that game. Now, this is a very nice recent paper from this year, in fact, by Emily Son, and it just gives you those kind of secrets to writing a winning grant. Again, urge you to read it. It's very, very straightforward, very simple. You've got to learn about the funding landscape, know what's available, find out what grant schemes are available. Institutions should be doing that, but also the researchers. You can't jump straight into the multi-million dollar kind of grants. You've got to start small and build your portfolio. So start small and then grow bigger. Ask important questions, as we mentioned. Be innovative. Use your mentors. Let them help you. Let them direct you. You avoid all of the pitfalls and all of the kind of past experience of failure. And collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. Once more, this is the most important aspect of any research, including for funding. Now, learn how to write effectively. And again, just exactly as in writing papers, it's exactly the same concept for writing grants. There's grantsmanship, and all of the successful grant writers are incredibly adept at this. And of course, you've got to be communicating this very well. This is Alan Alda, the famous actor from MASH, and he actually is the founding member of the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science. Communication is not something you add onto science, it is the essence of science. And this applies so much when you're writing grants. Now, this is for institutions. This is not for the junior faculty sitting there. So have a strategy and invest in the right expertise, focus those resources and aspirations. So don't be, jack of all trades as an institution, just focus on your strengths. Provide support, mentorship, selection, tracking, and learning from successful and unsuccessful grant rounds. Identify your strengths and weaknesses, and provide access to your researchers to actually examine those successful grants that are actually, to learn from them. So, and finally, maximize your philanthropic funding, because that's one safety net that can guarantee the continuing kind of research culture when things dry up, say from the government side of things. Now, these are general strategies for institutions, and this is me kind of venting my own frustrations over many, many years. For institutions, have an agile, responsive, inspiring strategy. It's all about inspiring the next generation. It's all as working in a team. Simplify bureaucracy. It can take, 3 months to appoint the research assistant. It's got to be something that is much, much quicker and much more efficient, so that the research actually goes on and doesn't start, stop. Don't burden researchers with too much administration. Make the administrators actually manage the needs of the researchers, and not the other way around. They're not there to manage the researchers, they're to manage their needs. Don't waste your resources on recruitment or talent acquisition agencies. Use your researchers, use your outstanding staff to do that task for you. It will save millions and millions of dollars. Keep your researchers inspired and motivated, and remember that we all exist to do some good, and this should be the guiding principle for us as institutions. Now, I'd just like to conclude by thanking you all for your attention and for this giving me this honor and this privilege of speaking to you this morning. And I'd like to thank my own staff here at the Microbiome Research Center at St. George Hospital, University of New South Wales. And I owe all my inspiration to them and to our continued work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emad. Thank you for the really concise way of simplifying the high-performing culture in the top university. What I really amazed about Emad is that when he moved to Sydney, within a few years, he made Sydney Centre as the world-class centre. My question is that, before I take the questions, my question, if we invite you or even Sonia to UKM, will you be able to change UKM into the world-class university?
So the answer is yes, but obviously it's not something that will happen, within a short period of time. But it's far more important, if you want to invest in the next generation, is that the processes and the actual methodology is established, and it's a very robust one. And having looked at UKM and having actually read up a lot more about it, and having liaised with yourself and with all our wonderful colleagues there, you've got every opportunity to do this. Very motivated, highly inspiring, and a lot of hunger for success. And that is far more important than anything else. These are the constituents that can give you that success that you all seek. But there's no magic formula that you can employ and then that's it, everything's going to happen. It takes time, but it is definitely achievable.
All right, okay, the first question would be, the majority of your characteristics that you mentioned just now is about human factor. Even the 8th one, I think majority is about human factor. So how do you really encourage the research culture in a person?
Yeah, so I have this mantra which I followed all my, I as an aspiring researcher, and I started my interest in research at the age of 4. So I was committed to a career in medicine research because I genuinely love it. I breathe it. And I benefited quite a lot from mentorship. As a medical student, I went knocking on doors, looking for people that would take me in. And I had wonderful mentors, and I could list, usually I put the pictures of them. So I set about actually growing my own. So for those institutions that are not Harvard or, Monash University or, all the top ones, you grow your own. I mean, essentially you go around, I usually used it at my previous institution at University of Aberdeen. I would go there and actually have the first talk to the medical student in the very first day and inspire them about research. And then with a very limited budget, I set about actually creating a research, summer studentship, for example, that allowed a certain number of students to come in their summer holidays and work with a clinical academic and with a scientist and see what we're doing. And, by the end of by the time I left Aberdeen, we had an army of absolutely wonderful researchers. Inspire them, give them opportunities, reward the really, really wonderful ones by sending them to Harvard, sending them to whatever institution for another opportunity to acquire that kind of, to kind of keep that wonderful inspiration going. And trust me, I'm my biggest achievement so far in my life is the number of clinical academics I've generated in my trail.
So the second question would be, questions is about brief reports or letters to editor, which publish smaller studies reporting the original idea or data in a high impact journal. Is that considered as a high impact publication?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. If your publication has led to a new frontier or new discussions or debate or whatever it is, it's absolutely brilliant. I mean, this is an opportunity. And I always say to, the faculty is, for God's sake, if you have an idea, just, write to them in whichever format it is. It doesn't matter. I mean, they all count. And quite often you find, a little letter actually is the most highly cited, publication, or, I mean, citations is one way of looking at it, but nowadays in the kind of the, modern social media driven culture, there's alternative ways of assessing impact. There's this thing called altmetrics, and that sort of doesn't actually just use citations. It uses, how many news outlets, for example, picked up the story, or how many people tweeted it, or, put it on, all the different kind of platforms. And this is generating interest. And there's a revolution now on Twitter, for example, in terms of science and medicine. And it really is wonderful to kind of observe that communication.
Right. Okay, before we wait for other questions, can I just ask you, by reading, the success of the research culture, it all depends on a leadership. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I think, any enterprise that is worthwhile must have leadership. Leadership, not leadership, like, administrative leadership, but inspiring leadership. People, you want to have a leader that you respect and actually love. You're so inspired by leading by example. And that's what it's all about. I think this is where it's you're investing in people, but you've got to give them a role model. And I think us as as leaders, we've got to create those role models and allow that next generation to come through.
All right. So the next question would be, any tips or how collaboration can be pursued, as there may not be many renowned researchers who want to collaborate with a less known institution like, UKM.
Yeah, because I kind of disagree, because I think, collaboration is not about just collaborating with the high impact kind of equivalent institutions. It's about actually bringing people together. And everyone has a unique contribution. I give you a little example. I mean, we're interested in maternal and child health. We're doing a big study on, pregnancy and the microbiome and all that kind of stuff. And, we can do the study in Australia, but what relevance is that to Malaysia or to China or to Europe, Whereas if you collaborate together as equals, okay, and contribute whatever strength you have, you might have the patients, you might have, somebody who's a whiz kid and, in epidemiology or whatever it is, that product is far more impactful, far better for science and medicine than anything else. Those are the kind of collaborations where it's not the fact how much, how many Nobel Prize winners you have. It's actually genuine, living kind of collaboration. And I think that's far more important than anything else.
All right. So the next question would be, what's the strategy to maintain or even improve your research quality with continuous budget cut? Do you expect that to happen post-pandemic?
Yes, actually, I mean, this is a fascinating question and a difficult one to answer, other than if you believe in the cause, you shall prevail. You should, it's just one of those situations where you've just got to develop that tenacity and focus and become an expert at managing things at low cost. And, and to some extent, actually, you become far more innovative. And I can tell you for sure, I've worked in both situations, and in the institutions I've worked at NIH, for a number of years, and where money was just no object. I mean, you could fund anything you like because it was an intramural kind of budget. And there's a little bit of kind of, you're spoiled. And to some extent, there's an extravagance about the research that you're doing that is not really progressing things very, very fast. Whereas if you have a very limited, resources, your impact is much higher, because you know for sure that the things you're going to ask and try and research are the absolutely necessary ones. So just develop that kind of tenacity and get through the difficult times, and eventually you will be rewarded. That's natural justice, I think.
So next question would be, how we balance the research and service, because we also have clinician here. So yeah, they want to know how you balance it.
Yeah, it's you've got to have passion. I mean, research is not easy. Research is a very difficult kind of undertaking if you're not really into research. So you've got to have passion. You've got to define that as your mission in life. As a clinician, my inspiration is from the patients. I see the disease, I see inflammatory bowel disease, and it's horrible. I see cancer, and it's horrible. And I see how it affects the patients and their relatives, okay? That's what keeps me going through all the tough times. It's just, I want to make a difference, and I make an advancement in it so that we can lessen that disease burden. So that's how you can overcome a lot of the extra work and burden of, getting a successful research. So if you're not interested in that, it doesn't matter. You're not a lesser person, but focus your effort and your contributions on delivering healthcare at the bedside or at the community level. But if you're interested in research, you've got to have that driving passion to keep you going, working a hell of a lot more hours, and actually having to be responsible for your staff who are just like another family. I have 6 children of my own, and then I have 30 people in my team. They're all my children, so you've got to actually keep looking after all of them, to try and, maintain that kind of drive.
Yeah. So next question would be, what do you think the impact of pandemic upon the research culture? Will you consider the limitation financially or socially?
Yeah, both, unfortunately, because so obviously economically, all countries have been affected. So that's going to impact on the research funding available. 2, a lot of institutions have actually stopped research altogether because they're trying to, rein in the exposure. So that's had an impact. But even socially, I think, people who usually participate in research are also now reluctant to have that exposure, because nobody knows where we're heading. Again, just an example for the study that I mentioned about the pregnancy. We're looking at preconception health. So that requires women to be actively, seeking pregnancy. And of course, in this current environment, it's very difficult. It's very difficult so that's had an impact, and from a completely unexpected angle, because of this pandemic, people, economically are insecure. They don't know what they're going to lose their jobs or not. This is the last time you want to have a baby. So to some extent, they're all kind of interlinked, and obviously impact on the research. But we've got to be tough, and we've got to be persistent, and we're just going to keep going on.
I think the last question would be, Prof. Nalina thinks that the motivation and patience toward the research it has to be internally passionate about it. So do we just focus for those who are inherently passionate, or you're trying to get everyone motivated externally? So what do you think?
Yeah, so again, a very important question. So I'm not expecting everyone to be like, like us, like motivated from internally, but I would like to think, again, as a clinician, that the best way of becoming an excellent clinician, is through research. So you've got to have experienced, at least briefly, the tenets of research. You understand why we do research and how it contributes, because it's not, we don't have these guidelines out of nothing. They've come through many, many decades of research. So I think it is, as an institution, if I were running the university, I would have that as an essential part of teaching the students. And then if we inspire a few of them that are going to be, passionate about it, that's great. You don't need, 200 leaders out of a class of 300. You just need 5. So that's more than enough to actually maintain that kind of drive forward.
All right. So the last one, I think, as a junior researchers, any tips on how to start collaborations and sharing expertise?
Yes. So don't be shy. Don't think that if you write to someone who's very well published and very highly cited and very important, that that you're going to be rebuffed. Not at all, actually, because quite often it's an opportunity for that particular researcher to open up a new front. So one is, don't be shy, just seek out. And the other thing is, obviously, unfortunately, it doesn't happen now because of is meetings, the international meetings. And this is an opportunity to go and actually see the potential collaborators face to face, discuss with them, offer them something that you have, ask if you can join them, if that's a possibility. All of these things happen. You've got to touch flesh. Not in this era, obviously, but you've got to do the hard work of advertising yourself. So it's not going to come to you. You've got to actually go to them. But quite a lot of these people would actually be delighted to help.
Emad is still coming in question. You have to stay with me. Another question is there any KPI or the performance indicator in your center or your university? Because people are talking about quantity versus quality. Do you have that for your staff yearly performance?
Oh, yes. Yes, we all have KPIs and assessments and appraisals and so forth. So it's part and parcel of and I think it's a good thing. I think it just keeps you on your toes, and it kind of resets the compass every now and then, especially if you're actually well funded. You might just, as I said, you're just lazy and you're essentially just overindulging in science, but not really having an impact. And I think it's quite useful to kind of have an institutional oversight of where everybody's heading. And I think that is not a bad thing. But equally, you don't want this to be very laborious. I mean, because, the worst thing that can affect people who are enthusiastic is having people in admin who are totally unenthusiastic, people who basically just out there to make your life miserable. So essentially, you've got to have a balance between oversight, but helpful oversight that actually allows everybody to stay and keep their motivation.
Right. I think the last question would be, many lecturers here do not have mentors. So can you give some advice on how to choose mentors? Because some of the younger lecturers love to work in silo and working together. Getting a correct mentor has to be, correct direction. Yeah.
Excellent. So if you have an interest in, say, for example, you want to be an ophthalmologist or something, or, and you've followed the field and you look at the publications, and there's somebody in your own department, your university, in the city, just get in touch with them and say that, you're very keen you're inspired by their work and so forth. So you can judge the kind of success of that mentorship by the output of that particular mentor. So if they published, really exciting work that is progressive and not just a one-off thing, in other words, that is active, by speaking to the people working in that group, by finding out what opportunities are available, so do your homework on them. And then obviously, if you think you've got enough inspiration and motivation, then approach them, but so you want to approach people who are very, very active, proactive, and have a good reputation with mentoring junior staff.
I think, Emad, I think we have to end this. If not, you're going to sleep here with me. Yeah, one thing that I learned the words collaboration. So we have participants today from different universities, even the general public university as well as the private university. So I think the key words that you have mentioned today is collaboration. So thank you so much. I think your energy, everyone agree that it's very infectious, very contagious now. Everybody, high energy. I hope to see you soon.
Hope so. Yeah. Thank you so much again.
Any last word?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Emad and Prof. Nofilza, for these very interesting sessions. We have gained a lot from you, and yeah, collaborations, good mentorings are one of the two most important things that we should be looking into. Okay.
Kita